Hi, this is K.N.Fitzwater and welcome to my channel. I have changed locations since the last video recording because I thought this would be a little bit brighter. I am using a handheld video camera, so I'm sorry there's going to be some shaking involved. Haven't found the tripod yet. I want to go ahead and mention about this whole thing. I'm trying a new low-key makeup palette. One I found said, oh, you could use glitter for the daytime. It's fine. It's not messy. You could go ahead and wear it. So I thought I could do this. It got all over the place. If this looks very odd, I apologize. Not normally a glitter type of person, but I thought, why not? I give it a shot. Another thing I would like to mention is that I am wearing my bestie t-shirt. My best friend is down there in Georgia pursuing her acting career. She is auditioning, and I hope she makes it and is able to get through the cut. This is a shout out for her. I hope you are safe. I hope you are able to get what you're looking for, and I really, really wish you all the best. I love you. I'm just going to call out here. I've been watching the news about the hurricanes and what people had experienced in Houston and what people had experienced in the Caribbean. And my heart goes out to them, and I pray that the people in Florida and in all the other coastal areas that they will stay safe. And I hope that they're not going to experience so much trauma from all of this. And we really are thinking about you guys, and we hope that you get through this. I'll explain a little bit further the difference between conceptual writers and intuitive writers. I will go into further about story structure. Intuitives and conceptuals. In layman terms, it's pantsing and plotters. Pantsing is about going with the flow when you have a blank page, just starting out with an image or the first sentence that comes to mind and constructing the story from there. Generally, one does not have a in-depth outline, just a really raw, abstract idea that one is working with. That's the whole point about pantsing or intuitives. Conceptual writers or plotters will just construct everything ahead of time. They'll construct the world, they construct the characters, they will flesh out chapters by chapters, by bullet points. Then they get into the very in-depth process of the creative first draft. I'm going to tell you that from what I've heard throughout the web is that these conceptual writers demand that you need to have an outline first. This is not the case. It is optional to have an outline first. I have started with just a basic outline in my head for this book and for other projects I'm working on, and I didn't need a concrete detail by detail chapter outline for my work. Instead, I use it as a checklist. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, is how a pantser like I am handles story structure. If you are a conceptual writer, it's okay to do this way ahead of time, but if you are not one of those people where you prefer to go at it and then have a checklist to go by, this video is really meant for you. Story structure is a little bit more complex than beginning, middle, and end right now. It is a flexible framework and can be used for all sorts of genres, all sorts of situations, no matter what type of hero you have and what situations occur. It's just a matter of identifying your structural beats. Story has been taught that it is a line. So we're going to say this is the start of the story, and this is the end. Somewhere you have the middle, we're going to put M. In the beginning, you pretty much set the situation. We create issues through conflict, obstacles in the characters' paths, and create a series of tensions. They see it as how high the tension is up to a defining moment in the story, and then it all comes crashing down, which people call it the denouement. It simply means that from this action everything falls into place. Because of this decisive moment, everything came as a result of such. After it reached to a certain point, we have the wrap-up, the conclusion. So Shakespeare follows this, the ancient Greek plays follow this. Our modern stories deviated from this concerning about tension. They start off here kind of no different than the starting point, but as we rise, we keep rising until we reach to a climatic moment. And then it's a very short drop to the ending. I'm going to have to say that both structures are the same to me. I'm going to show you how I put them together. I don't use a tension scale, and my start to end is not a line. It's a little bit different. I see story structure as a circle. This is my beginning, right here. This line here represents what is familiar, which is above the surface, and what is unfamiliar. And I'm just going to divide this here, so that way we could kind of see it like a fan that's being opened completely. You could kind of see already what the first act, second act, and third act looks like. In a modern sense, we have something called a midpoint, or middle of the story. And that is, believe it or not, stories in all movies and all plays roughly have a beat, a rhythm to them. And depending on how long it is, depends on where that beat falls. Usually, a quarter through the story, the hero will go into an unknown situation. This is where Dorothy lands in Oz. This whole time, she has been in Kansas. And here is where the tornado occurs. In movies, it comes down to a minute. In books, it comes down to a chapter. We have a lot more leeway than most people like to think about story structure. Not even a couple of pages, probably like 10 pages or so, if it's a normal novel, that we could describe that situation happening. So I'll just say 25%. So a quarter into the story, we see her fall in there. Half of the story from there to the third act is where all the meat occurs. We have divided it up in modern era. In fact, because of plays, we demand a bigger midpoint. Midpoint for authors simply means this is where everything turns. There's a pivot. It's where we start contrasting this half to the other half. I could treat this as a mirror to what has happened here, as a reflection of what had occurred. if you have folded this down, we could contrast how the ending differs from the beginning. And I could do this in my mind with this circle picture. From here on out, everything shifted. It happens in all movies, it happens in all stories. In Joseph Campbell's structure, this is where they meet the goddess. George Lucas see it as this is when Luke finally finds Leia in the detention center. We kind of need that now as an audience, because in plays they break their stories in half. They need a way to entice the audience to come back for the rest of the play. Believe it or not, people will up and walk and say, I am done, I need my money back, I'm out of here because it's lousy. For storytellers, this is crucial that we keep them in their seats and wait for the second half. And this has come into our movies and films. Here is the 75%. As you notice, this is where we come into a more familiar territory. And yet, they have changed to where they once were here. The journey has changed them to where they are able to handle a situation they couldn't handle before. It could be a villain's base. A villain's very familiar with our home turf. This is a different environment. But because they have experienced all these changes here, they're now able to take it on. That's pretty much how all the acts occur for the most part. Each part of the story, each quarter, has a rise and fall. And I'm going to do this here. This is very similar to the story structure called Dramatica. And I'm going to put it as a roughly a 15, roughly a 30%. This is your 50%. This is roughly 60%. This is your roughly 90%. The reason why audiences want this pie divided into eighths is because of films. Films originally come into cans. Even though films are probably just like an hour long, they only have the technology to have so many minutes in cans. And what they do, they insert one can in one projector and insert the other waiting in line until this one ended, and then they could bring this forward and continue on. Not all theaters have both projectors. That's very expensive. So your local theaters will go ahead and turn off the projector when it's done, take off the can and slap it on there and flip on the switch. This may take a couple of minutes. In the meantime, the audience may up and move or leave. This is another situation where story writers see a problem and start creating stories that keep them in their seats. Now it's at these 8 beats instead of 4 beats. This is the point where they voice out their issues, their concern. Everything is wonderful or everything's normal, but I'm lacking something inside. Or it's something where an opportunity comes forward and now the hero has to do something about it. In Joseph Campbell, this is where the hero refused. If everyone's seen The Hobbit, everyone knows that Bilbo refused to go. For Luke, he's no different. That's the classic hero. Other heroes, when they have the opportunity, may plan. Or they may do something with a tried and true method, but it falters, it fails, and they have to come up a different strategy or go through a series of events to make it work. As they journey through here, they come through trials and errors. But But because it's an unfamiliar situation, they're kind of bumbling through. They're at a loss. They require people who are familiar with this situation to be their guide, more or less. This is just exploring things and learning the environment, how to overcome such obstacles. This is why in the book Hobbit, it's just nothing but short stories of little adventures that they all come across. From going down in barrels, escaping from the Elf King's halls or prisons, to dealing with the trolls. It's a series of events that may not correlate with each other, except for the fact that they're moving forward on a general path towards Erebor. Here, in the modern day audience, they require something a little bit more than just a series of adventures. They require a interaction or a view of the villain's wrath. Why do we have to fear this villain? What is it about this person or being that we have to fear? So from here, this is where the villain shows its strength, or where the villain is introduced. And as they continue on from this point forward, the interaction with that villain is intensified or continues to become troublesome for the heroes. The midpoint nowadays is not just about meeting the goddess, it's about learning a truth. This is where they obtain not what they wanted, but what they really need to go ahead and solve and conquer what's going on here. This is why I like my circle method. I see it as a triangle. It's like a pizza. The midpoint is supposed to show what they want, what they really need, and what they need is going to help them defeat what's occurring here. This is them learning how to find that truth, and then once they know it, they deal with the consequences from obtaining it. Modern day audiences, going back to the old films of Dividing and Eighths, they're going to want some sort of emotional tension, where this is the worst case scenario they could possibly ever imagine. That's where this point comes in, where they're at a loss and they have a hard time getting out. This is their low point, and they really wonder, what are we going to do next? And just before this, we have a aha moment or a pep talk, and after this point, they reach into a familiar territory, but this point here, it shows where they have a one-to-one confrontation with a person. After that confrontation, after that duel, after that talk, things finally conclude. The story technically ends. You defeat the villain, but you still have to escape the falling temple or tower, because it's held aloft by his magic. The Brandon Fraser mummy is one of those things. They took out that mummy, but they had to escape Hamanatra because it's tumbling and it's gonna cave in. So that's where that point is, and then they have their ending, their little conclusion. This kind of wavers quite a bit depending on, how much is going on in the third act. There's a series of stages here where as you go on, it gets personal. The vision closes in to the actual one-to-one confrontation. For a pantsing or intuitive writer like me, you see this as a checklist. Your story may be this, where you have your ups and downs, and now you just got to start pinpointing what those sections are in your story. Go ahead and mark it and start making other points where you have in your story and start laying it on here. And this is where editing comes in. You realize that you could be off and you may have to shorten this. You may have the opportunity right here and it may be okay, but you may be completely off and you may need to bring it in. You may realize that you're doing okay and having a pitfall here, but you really have a sag in your middle. And maybe it's because you didn't realize that you haven't mentioned what that truth is, and you had depleted that in your story. So you may have to bring that out. We have a 5% of total content of wiggle room. Let's say you have a 80,000 word count. 5% of that is 4,000 words. If you have been doing it in manuscript format, having it at 4,000, let's say you've been doing 280 per page, that's roughly 14 pages, 14 to 15 pages of wiggle room. In script, that's like 1 or 2 minutes. And in scripts on your pages, each page is a minute. So you don't have as much wiggle room as an author does. Go from your total count and divide it however you wish. You don't have to divide it into eighths. You don't even have to divide it into quarters. You could divide it into thirds. Or R.S. Adhere has it where he divided it into fifths. This is going off of The Servant of the Shard, one of my favorite books from R.S. Adhere. And he had it where this was the middle. He had it where it's kind of like this. And that's the whole story arc of the book. It's divided into fifths. You could do that. And you could do that in chapters. You don't have to divide your book into pages. It took me a while to understand this. I started off learning how to write in scripts, and I switched over to how to write in novels. And I realized how much breathing room I have. Currently, my book, everything is roughly a few pages within the beats, now that I've restructured it, except for, this point here. That's like 11 pages away from the actual beat. I'm not going to fret over it because that's well within the 5% rule that we have for literature. So you could divide your story however you want, so long you identify where your markers are and you put it roughly to where it needs to be in that story and give it some sort of shape, because without that shape you're going to lose your readers. If it's getting too long to get to a certain point, they get bored. If it's too soon, they will think, oh, this is the actual pace of the story. And when they realize, oh, it's too soon, but they haven't reached that other point yet, they're going to wonder, why it went from a thriller to like a classical drama. Conceptual writers do this ahead of time. I'm telling you, as a pantser, you could have this as a checklist, and that will help bring your original story into a great one. First draft is crap. That's from Hemingway. The first draft is crap because we're translating from what's in our creative side, and it's not going to be logical. Grammar is logical. Flow is logical. Structure is logical. When we create, we don't think about that for the most part. That's not going to translate to a reader. They're going to see it as, what is this? You're going to have to start creating it into something they could comprehend. And that's the point about structure. I hope you like this video. I hope this helps those who are pantsing or intuitives kind of have an idea what that is. And for my fans, I hope this makes you understand why I talk about story structure. I'm in the middle of editing right now. I am at this point in my story. From here on out, I'm really going to start ripping this section apart in my story. So I hope you like this video. If you want to comment about what other points or anything you're confused about, put it down in the comments and I'll go ahead and talk to you soon.